My name is Sergeant Clara Vance, and I'm 32. I'm an intel analyst in the Army, stationed at a pretty desolate forward operating base, or a FOB, out in the middle of nowhere. It's hot, dusty, and honestly, mostly boring, except when it's not. And when it's not boring, it's usually because someone or something screws up. And usually, it's not me. It was a Monday, or maybe a Tuesday. Who really keeps track out here? The days just bleed into one another, marked only by the next briefing, the next patrol, the next shift in the sweltering intel shack. We were prepping for a high-priority extraction. A couple of our guys, local assets really, got themselves into a bind deep in enemy territory. Classic screw-up? Really, but of course, we had to go in and fix it. That's always how it goes, isn't it? Everyone else messes up, and then I have to pull an all-nighter to figure out how to unfuck their mess. My superior, Captain Davies, was leading the briefing. He's one of those guys who always looks like he just rolled out of bed, even when he's in full uniform. His beard is always a bit scruffy, and he has this habit of scratching his ear when he's thinking, or pretending to think. I always thought he was a bit of a lightweight. Honestly, too soft. He'd never been in the shit like I had. Not really. He talks a good game. But I've seen him crack under pressure, just not in the way I do, which is more productive. He just kind of shuts down, gets that glazed over look. Anyway, the briefing was dragging. It was always like that with Davies. He'd drone on, repeating himself, fumbling with the projector. I swear. Sometimes I think he just likes to hear himself talk. He was going over the extraction points, the primary and secondary routes, the fallback positions, all standard stuff. Really? But he was making it sound like he was discovering a new planet. Meanwhile, I'd already run the numbers, cross-referenced the intel, highlighted the choke points, and had a contingency for every contingency. That's what I do. I'm good at it. The best, actually. But then Davies, in his infinite wisdom, decided to crack a joke. Something about how the local insurgents were probably more afraid of my death glare than our actual firepower. He laughed. A few of the guys chuckled. That idiot. Specialist Miller, always laughing at everything Davies says, even when it's not funny. Miller, with his wide-eyed eagerness and his constant need to prove he's one of the guys. He's the kind of person who's just too nice, always offering to help, always smiling. It's irritating, honestly. Like, does he not understand how this place works? You don't get ahead by being everyone's best friend. You get ahead by being indispensable, by being me. And that joke, it just hit me wrong. It wasn't funny. It was belittling. Like I was some kind of cartoon villain. Me, who had spent the last 72 hours straight, fueled by instant coffee and sheer willpower, analyzing every single scrap of intel to make sure these clowns didn't get themselves killed. Me, who had identified the exact window when the satellite coverage would be optimal, when the dust storms would die down just enough, when the enemy patrols would be at their lowest. And he makes a joke about my death glare. I felt this pressure building behind my eyes. It wasn't fair. It was never fair. I do all the work, I carry the team, and I get a joke. A condescending, dismissive joke. I could feel my face getting hot, my throat tightening, and then, before I could stop it, a tear slipped out. Just one, at first, then another. I tried to blink them back, to discreetly wipe them away, but it was too late. Davies stopped talking. The chuckles died down. Everyone was looking at me. Sergeant Vance, are you all right? Davies asked, his voice suddenly all concerned. Concerned. He wasn't concerned about the impossible hours I was pulling, or the stress of holding everyone's lives in my hands. He was concerned because I was having a moment. In public? I just shook my head, trying to compose myself. I'm fine. Captain, I choked out, but my voice was shaky. Betraying me? I hated it. I hated feeling weak, especially in front of them. It felt like they were all judging me, thinking I was some overly emotional woman who couldn't handle the pressure. But it wasn't about the pressure. It was about the disrespect. It was about being invisible until I wasn't. And then being mocked for it. Davies, bless his soft, incompetent heart, tried to make it better. Look, Vance, I was just kidding. You know, to lighten the mood. You've been working hard. We all appreciate it. Appreciate it? No, they don't. If they appreciated it, they wouldn't joke about me like that. If they appreciated it, he would have done his own damn job and not relied on me to do half of his... I just nodded, pretending to accept his half-hearted apology. But inside, I was seething. The humiliation burned hotter than any desert sun. I felt everyone's eyes on me. Some pitying, some probably annoyed. Like I was being a drama queen. But they don't know what it's like. They don't know the pressure. They don't know what I've been through. I'd been through worse. Much worse. I remember my first deployment. When I was just a private, the guys, always the guys, thought it was hilarious to haze the new female recruit. Short-sheeting my bed, hiding my gear, accidentally bumping into me in the chow hall. And when I went to report it, my first sergeant, a woman, no less, told me to suck it up. Buttercup. Said I needed to grow a thicker skin if I wanted to make it in the army. A thicker skin? Like it was my fault for being harassed. Like I was the one with the problem. I learned then that nobody was going to stick up for me. I had to do it myself. And that meant never showing weakness. Never. So, when that joke from Davies hit, it wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder. A reminder of every time I'd been dismissed, every time I'd been underestimated, every time my efforts had been minimized. And the tears, they weren't just about the joke. They were about all of it. All the silent battles I'd fought. All the slights I'd endured. All the times I'd swallowed my anger and just kept going. But this time, it just bubbled over. After that little scene, the briefing got awkward. Davies tried to get back on track, but the energy was all wrong. He rushed through the last few slides, stumbling over his words, clearly rattled. He ended it abruptly, telling everyone to review the materials and be ready for the go-ahead. I stayed behind, packing up my laptop. I could feel Davies hovering. Clara, look, I really am sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I looked at him, trying to keep my face neutral. It's fine. Captain? Just tired? Long week? It wasn't fine. It wasn't fine at all. But what was I going to say? That his casual disrespect had triggered a lifetime of repressed anger and resentment. That his stupid joke had made me feel utterly dehumanized. No. That would just confirm their suspicions that I was too emotional. He fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. Right. Well, try to get some rest. Big day tomorrow? Big day. As if he was the one bearing the weight of it all. I just nodded and walked out, leaving him standing there in the empty briefing room. I went back to my desk in the intel shack, which was usually buzzing with activity, but everyone had already cleared out, probably to avoid me. They always do that. As soon as there's any kind of emotional moment, they scatter like cockroaches. Because, a woman having emotions is just so inconvenient. I slumped into my chair, staring at the maps on my screen. The extraction window? It was tight. Tighter than Davies understood. We had a narrow 2-hour slot. Maximum before the weather shifted, before enemy patrols increased, before the ground dried up too much for the choppers to land safely. And if we missed it, well, those assets were on their own, and it would be on my head, because everything always is. I was supposed to send the final go-ahead, the green light based on my analysis. That's how it worked. My intel, my call. Davies just rubber-stamped it. He trusted my judgment implicitly, even if he made jokes about my death glare. Funny, isn't it? He'll mock me, but he'll also blindly follow my recommendations when lives are on the line. It's almost like he knows, deep down, who the real professional is. But after that briefing, all I could think about was that joke, and how everyone else laughed. How Miller, that pathetic sycophant, snickered right along with them. He was always so eager to please Davies, always volunteering for extra shifts, always bringing him coffee, always agreeing with everything he said. It made me sick, like a little puppy dog, and I knew why. He wanted to get promoted. He wanted to move up, and he thought sucking up to Davies was the way to do it. But I knew the truth. Davies didn't respect him. Not really. He just tolerated him. I thought about all the times Miller had undermined me, subtly. Of course, not directly, because he's too much of a coward for that. But he'd forget to pass along a message, or accidentally misplace some intel I'd given him, or misunderstand my instructions. Little things. Just enough to make my life harder, to make me look less efficient. He probably thought I didn't notice, but I notice everything, and I remember everything, so I sat there, stewing. The clock was ticking. The extraction window was approaching, but I just couldn't bring myself to send that email. Not yet. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Davies' stupid grin, the snickers from the others, the humiliation. It felt like a punch to the gut, and I thought, why should I bend over backward for them? Why should I save their asses when they treat me like this? It wasn't a conscious decision. Not really. It was more like a slow, creeping inertia. I just didn't do it. I opened the email, typed out the subject line, "Go ahead for Op Falcon." But then my fingers just froze over the keyboard. I stared at the blinking cursor, my mind a tangled mess of anger, resentment, and this strange, bitter satisfaction. Like, let them wait. Let them sweat a little. They deserved it. I told myself I was double-checking the coordinates, that I was verifying the comms channels, that I was just being thorough, like I always am. But deep down, I knew I was punishing them. I was punishing Davies for his stupid joke. I was punishing Miller for being a spineless suck-up. And I was punishing all the others who had stood by and watched, who had laughed, who had never once stood up for me. The first hour of the window passed. Then the second. I still hadn't sent the email. My phone buzzed. It was Davies. I let it ring. He tried again and again. Finally, I answered. Vance, where's the confirmation? The birds are inbound. We need the final word. His voice was tight, a frantic edge to it. Good. He should be frantic. He should be feeling a fraction of the pressure I feel every single day. Captain, I'm just finalizing the last-minute analysis, I said, trying to sound calm. Professional. There were some unexpected variables I needed to account for. I just wanted to be absolutely sure it was a lie. Of course. There were no unexpected variables. Everything was exactly as I'd predicted. But I said it with enough conviction that he probably believed me. He always believes me, because he needs me. Unexpected variables. Vance, we're on a clock here. The extraction window is closing. He sounded like he was about to explode. I almost smiled. Almost? I understand. Captain, but lives are at stake. I can't afford to be anything less than 100% certain. You wouldn't want me to rush this, would you? I knew that would get him. The implication that he was pushing me to be reckless. He prides himself on being by the book. There was a pause on his end. I could practically hear him chewing on his lip. No. No, of course not. Just hurry it up. Vance, they're getting antsy out there. On it, Captain. I hung up. I still didn't send it. The clock kept ticking. I watched the projected weather patterns on my screen, saw the wind speeds picking up, the visibility decreasing. I knew, rationally, that I was screwing them over, but the bitter satisfaction was still there, a hot ember in my chest. Let them miss it. Let them learn what it feels like to be overlooked, to be disposable. About 20 minutes later, Davies called again, practically yelling this time. Vance, what the hell is going on? We missed the primary extraction window. The assets are reporting increased enemy activity. We're pulling the birds back. It's too risky. Captain, I told you. I was just making sure everything was correct, I said, my voice still annoyingly calm. Perhaps if I hadn't been interrupted earlier, I would have been able to complete my analysis more efficiently. A passive-aggressive dig. Of course. He got it. I could hear him sigh. A long, weary sound. This is unacceptable. Sergeant, he said, his voice low and dangerous now. We missed the window by hours. Hours. Do you understand the implications of this? I understand them perfectly. Captain, I replied, my voice hard now. I did my due diligence. I followed protocol. And if unforeseen circumstances arise, that is not my fault. Perhaps if the initial intelligence was more robust, or if the planning hadn't been so rushed. I was rewriting history, of course. The intel was robust. The planning had been meticulous. All by me. But I was twisting it, spinning it, making it sound like their shortcomings were to blame. He hung up on me. Good. I didn't want to talk to him anyway. The fallout was predictable. The assets, our guys, were stuck. They had to go to ground, evade capture, and wait for another opportunity. It would be days, maybe even a week, before we could mount another extraction. And the longer they were out there, the higher the risk. It was dangerous, potentially deadly. Davies called me into his office the next morning. He looked even more disheveled than usual, his eyes bloodshot. Sergeant Vance. This is a formal inquiry, he said, his voice flat. We lost contact with the assets. They're in a critical situation because we couldn't get them out. And you were responsible for the final go-ahead. I sat across from him, my face a mask of polite concern. Captain, I assure you, I was operating within established parameters. My analysis indicated a slight risk in the initial proposed window, a risk that was, in my professional opinion, unacceptable. I needed more time to mitigate that risk. What risk? Vance. We had perfect satellite coverage, minimal ground patrols, and a clear LZ. What risk are you talking about? He slammed his fist on the desk. The risk of human error. Captain, I said, looking him dead in the eye. My risk assessment always accounts for variables outside of the purely technical. You yourself said I was under immense pressure. You yourself joked about my death glare. Perhaps the emotional toll of such a high-stakes operation, coupled with distractions, impacted my ability to deliver instantaneously. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He knew exactly what I was doing. I was weaponizing his own words, his own thoughtless joke, against him. I was using his brief, fleeting moment of concern to shield myself, and I was using my own manufactured vulnerability to shift the blame. It was perfect. He leaned back in his chair, defeated. So, you're saying this was my fault? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm saying that all factors contribute to the outcome. Captain, I replied, sounding genuinely regretful. And as an intel analyst, my job is to consider all factors, including the human element, including the environment, including the support I receive, or lack thereof. I let that hang in the air, thick with unspoken accusations. He just sighed, rubbing his temples. Get out, Vance. Just get out. I left his office, a strange sense of vindication washing over me. I hadn't explicitly blamed him, but I'd made sure he knew it was on him. Or at least, that I believed it was on him, and that was enough. Over the next few days, the tension in the phobby was palpable. Everyone knew about the missed extraction, about the assets being stuck. People looked at me differently, some with suspicion, some with outright hostility. But I just kept my head down, did my job, and acted like I was the most put-upon person there. I made sure to look tired, to sigh heavily, to make comments about how stressful everything was. I even let a few tears slip in front of Specialist Miller, blaming the pressure and the unforeseen complications. He, being the too nice guy that he is, actually tried to comfort me. Pathetic. Meanwhile, the efforts to extract the stranded assets continued. We tried a few more times, but each attempt was met with increased resistance. The enemy knew we were trying to get them out, and they were tightening their grip. It was like a game of cat and mouse, and we were losing, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that it was because of that initial delay, my delay. One night, about a week later, I was on shift in the intel shack. The radio crackled to life, and I heard the frantic voice of one of the assets. They were compromised. Under heavy fire, they needed immediate extraction, or they were dead. My stomach dropped. Even I, with my layers of self-preservation and denial, felt a jolt of something akin to fear. Davies was on the line a second later. Vance, what's their exact location? What's the fastest route in? Give me everything you got. He was practically begging. I pulled up the maps, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I knew the area intimately. I knew the routes, but everything was against us. The weather was terrible. A full-blown sandstorm was blowing in. The enemy was everywhere. There was no way to get a bird in, not safely, not without risking the lives of the pilots. And the rescue team, Captain, there's no clear path, I said, my voice strained. The storm, the enemy density, it's a suicide mission. I don't care. Vance, we have to try. There are guys, he roared. And what about the lives of the men we send in? Captain, I shot back, suddenly feeling righteous. My job is to minimize casualties, and sending them into that storm, into that hornet's nest, would be irresponsible, reckless. I was using my professionalism as a shield. Again, it was effective. There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated by the frantic sounds of gunfire over the open radio line from the assets. Then, a chilling sound. A final, garbled transmission, a scream, and then silence. Utter, terrifying silence. Davies slammed his fist on something, a loud thud echoing through the phone line. They're gone, Vance, he said, his voice completely broken. They're gone because we couldn't get to them. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the silent map on my screen. The blinking red dots. Now gone. 2 lives. Gone. Because of my death glare. Because of a joke. Because I was angry. And I felt a strange emptiness. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like a confirmation. A confirmation that my actions had consequences. But still, it wasn't my fault. Not really. It was Davies' fault for making the joke. It was Miller's fault for laughing. It was the system's fault for not supporting me. It was everyone else's fault but mine. The official inquiry was brutal. I was questioned for hours, grilled by higher-ups. But I stuck to my story. I was thorough. I was professional. I was operating under duress. I was trying to mitigate risk. I even cried again, quietly, effectively, talking about the emotional toll of the job, the impossible choices we had to make. I twisted every word, every event, until it sounded like I was the diligent, overworked analyst who had done everything she could in the face of overwhelming odds and unsupportive leadership. Davies, on the other hand, cracked. He admitted he'd been too lenient with me, that he hadn't pushed hard enough for the initial extraction. He took responsibility for failing to ensure clear communication channels and for underestimating the impact of internal team dynamics on operational readiness. He basically fell on his sword. The too nice guy to the end? He got a formal reprimand, a black mark on his record, and was reassigned to a dead-end desk job stateside. His career was effectively over. Mean, however, continued. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Sergeant Vance acted within her professional judgment. The report read, while the outcome was regrettable, her actions were consistent with a cautious approach to risk assessment. They even commended me for my dedication under pressure. It was infuriating, really, that they didn't see the real truth, but also deeply satisfying. The others on the FOB, the ones who had snickered at Davies's joke, the ones who had avoided me, they mostly just kept their distance. Specialist Miller, though, that pathetic, eager-to-please idiot, he eventually transferred out, said he couldn't work in an environment where accountability wasn't prioritized. He was talking about me, of course, but he couldn't say it. Too much of a coward. He just packed his bags and left, looking defeated, like he was the victim. He never understood, did he, that sometimes you have to be the one to make the tough calls, the ones that sting. To ensure your survival, I got a promotion 6 months later, Sergeant First Class. Not because of the incident, officially, but because my record was spotless. Demonstrated exceptional analytical skills. The promotion board said, proven ability to operate independently under high pressure. It was all true, of course. I am exceptional. I do operate under high pressure, and now I'm getting the recognition I deserve. Sometimes, late at night, when the dust storms are howling outside my tiny room, I think about those two assets, the two guys who never came home, and I think about Davies, stuck behind a desk somewhere, his career in shambles, and Miller, who ran away with his tail between his legs. Do I feel bad? Not really. They made their choices. Davies chose to make a joke at my expense. Miller chose to laugh at it. And the assets, well, they chose to get themselves into that bind in the first place. Didn't they? If they had been more careful. If they had followed protocol, maybe none of this would have happened. I did what I had to do to protect myself. To survive? In this world, you either get eaten, or you do the eating, and I'm not about to be someone else's meal. People always say karma's a bitch, but sometimes karma just shows you who's stronger, and it's not always the one who gets to pretend they're a hero. It's the one who's still standing. And I'm still standing, still here, still doing my job, and still waiting for someone to finally appreciate me for it. But I won't hold my breath. They never do,